Happy December. Welcome into another edition of the Hops and Spirits Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Green, and we've got a lot of good stuff for you this week. We talked to Tim Knittel and Aften Locken of Distilled Living and Jarrett Dieterle. I think I said that right. I don't know. We'll find out. We talked to him as he wrote a new book that's a really cool read about the alcohol industry. Also, in between the two interviews, I'll give you details on our Things We Love holiday giveaway. We got a lot of goodies. You already know about Pies and Pints and Gish Pack, but our grand prize, so to speak, I'll tell you about that here in just a little bit. But let's get into this episode and not waste any time as we have a fun chat about bourbon, cocktails, and food. Aften Locken and Tim Knittel of Distilled Living. Aften, Tim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Now, for those that don't know, Tim talked a little bit before on a previous episode about, virtual tastings, different things like that. But now we're moving into the holidays. And Tim, most people, kind of want to maybe ramp up their meals a little bit and maybe pair them with some fine drinks. You have some helpful tips for people to do that.
Yeah, at least I like to think that they're helpful. They've worked for me. So since I got into the bourbon industry about 12 years ago, it's been kind of my responsibility by default to bring any sort of interesting and fun bourbons and work out the pairings as we go. And that's always sort of become a tradition in my family that I'm gonna do that. And I've learned a little bit over the years about doing that. And this year I'm kind of thinking about it in terms of care packages because I won't be getting together with anybody in person. But I may be delivering either full bottles or I might be making mini bottles for people. And I really want to give them a whole experience, and not just give them a bottle, but give them maybe a whole course. So the things that I've learned about working with bourbon and dishes and culinary is the first thing to think about bourbon is that it's an aged product. And age tends to pair with age. So most of the products are going to be 5 to 10 years old in the making. And we're going to look for aged and cured meats, aged cheeses, maybe toasted nuts, which are going to pair really well. The smoking works well for foods and pairs well with bourbon because of the charring of the barrel. So we're working with complementary flavors to start with. And I like to start with, especially with people who are not as into drinking bourbon as maybe I am, starting with the wheated style bourbons, right? There's a reason that Maker's Mark is as popular as it is. It's a soft, easier to get into bourbon. And maybe if you have some folks that you're introducing to bourbons that you're really excited about, start them there, or maybe with Larceny, which is another great wheated bourbon, and maybe even give them some ice ball molds. Bourbon doesn't have to be consumed neat. We want everyone to have a good, enjoyable experience with bourbon, so we want to meet them where they are. So that's kind of my first thought is start with new folks with the wheated style. And then as we move into the ryes and rye bourbon, especially the lower percentages, like maybe an Elijah Craig or a Buffalo Trace, those are where those are also going to be a little lower proof. So those are going to be both 90, 94 proof, that range. I really like to do kind of an antipasta or some sort of a charcuterie tray. So just like I talked about with those aged and cured meats, the salamis, the prosciuttos, the country hams, those are going to pair beautifully with that. I love a cave aged cheese with those kinds of bourbons, toasted and candied nuts. That's going to bring out some of the sweet character. And that's kind of creates its own course that way. And from there, I like to go something a little higher proof and maybe a little spicier, like a Wild Turkey 101, which I know a lot of people think back to their college days, but I guarantee if you present it to somebody blind, people get much more excited about it. Once you strip any sort of brand memory, personal memory out of it, people really, really like it. That's where we get into the entree. So I don't know about everybody else. My family entrees usually involve like a roast beef or a whole turkey or a whole chicken, something like that. And that, with bringing a little bit more fat, really appreciates well against a higher proof bourbon. Maybe a Johnny Drum, 101, something like that. Any of this sound familiar to any of your experiences or anything you've tried?
I mean, it does because when I think of bourbons, I don't want to come right in at 124 proof to start off, the evening. You want to come in something lighter, kind of on that ease, especially for those that aren't big bourbon drinkers. I'm just now kind of getting into the bourbon world a little more. Kind of taking that full jump in instead of just kind of putting my foot in there. But it's always also interesting to hear that the names of the bourbons and whiskeys that you're talking about are the ones that you can kind of go find. They're readily available for the most part, and they're not going to break the bank either.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're going to have a common experience with folks, even if you're not present with them, which I think is a really nice thing. And your comment about, starting to get with something that's 124 proof, that when you get into that high proof range, like we're talking about like a Stag or a Booker's or something like that, any of those other barrel proof products, those actually, even for people who are new to high proof, those pair beautifully with kind of your higher fatty, creamy kinds of desserts, because that cream is going to sit on the palate and knock off a little bit of the intensity. So I think those are beautiful against like a pumpkin pie, especially it's going to bring out the holiday spices, the cinnamon, nutmeg, clove that are going to reflect back, which is a beautiful, beautiful pairing. And if maybe the high proof is not your thing, the finished bourbons almost universally pair well with chocolate. So Woodford Double Oaked, Maker's 46, Angel's Envy. Those are just, you can't go wrong with those. They're a little lower proof. They're a little gentler. Even maybe serving them on a nice ice cube with some sort of dark chocolate is absolutely outstanding. It's the concept of Derby pie with the nuts and the chocolate. It doesn't need to be restricted to one weekend a year. I think it's a great kind of dessert for the holidays as well. And I also wanted to touch on, you talked about everything I've named so far is kind of the big brands. The craft brands have a lot more sort of potential flavor diversity and difference among them, especially when you get into stuff that is matured in a smaller barrel, like Hartfield and Company in a 6 gallon barrel, or a lot of the craft distillers like MB Roland or Bluegrass Distillers using 15s and 25 gallons. And they wind up being a really, really smoke forward. And so they're a little bit more difficult to get a really beautiful pairing with, except, again, chocolate. Almost universally, if you're picking up a bourbon that is new to you and it's the craft bourbon, just start with chocolate. I think you're going to make a really, really good pairing out of it.
So the go-to is if it's maybe not one of the big brands that everyone knows about, it's one of the local guys, because a lot of people like to shop local around the holidays. Going to their craft distiller, maybe just have that for dessert and pair it with some bourbon balls or chocolate or anything like that. Then right.
Yeah, that's going to be a great safe place to start, at least for kind of this holiday season. And then as you explore the culinary world in bourbon, you can look to the more nuanced flavors and build some more sophisticated pairings. But I think that's going to be my plan for this year, anyways. I'm gonna be using those craft bourbons with the chocolates and some of the others as we talked about, and bringing the high proofs in the middle.
So you're keeping it simple now. Say you talk about that care package where you might want to send a nice little something to your aunt or uncle or brother or sister that can't come in there, but they're living in a different state. Maybe put in some nuts, some crackers, different things like that, and a little bit of bourbon, or what are you thinking on something like a nice little care package that you're either dropping off or maybe sneaking out the door somehow.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And one really fun thing to do with people that are new to bourbon is to go ahead and give them 2 or 3 or 4 different ones. And talking about crackers, crackers, kind of evolved from grains in the same way that whiskeys did, with a lot of diversity. So starting with a wheated bourbon and wheat crackers, just so that people get a real tangible sense of the difference, and then maybe even going all the way to a rye whiskey, like an Old Forester rye with rye crackers. And then either of those sides using those aged cheeses and aged meats with it is just really spectacular. The only thing I really avoid is going to be kind of hot, spicy, piquant food, because people who are new to bourbon, especially, the heat on heat is a little much. So kind of maybe building your charcuterie board around 2 or 3 different types of crackers that match those bourbons and rye whiskeys, and then a spectrum of aged and cured meats and cheeses, maybe some berry spreads and things like that. Oh, that's going to be fantastic.
And then any other, like, you don't want to do this, some people, just coming straight out, pouring a glass of bourbon for everybody. Some people that would be a-okay, but for others, they might not want to do that. What's kind of maybe something they need to stay away with when it comes to trying to pair things that just don't work?
So we talked about the spicy and piquant foods. That's generally one to shy away from. Raw onions and bourbon are a struggle. It's just personal experience. I can tell you. You don't have to try it for yourself. Um, and any sort of sharp, acidic requires nuance, right? So I tend to shy away from strong vinegars and things like that. That doesn't mean you can't do it, and there are cocktails that are absolutely amazing that use bourbon and vinegar, but that's kind of advanced technique. So, and then anything really really soft, like mozzarella, was going to obliterate a lot of the nuanced flavors of bourbon. Which, if you're getting somebody started on bourbon, maybe and they're struggling with it, maybe give them that. But bear in mind, it's really going to cut down a lot of the interest and flavor from it, but it might make it a little more approachable. And the other thing that I see a lot is people get really excited about bourbon, especially in Kentucky, and we're starting to see that in a lot of other states, and they forget their own personal bourbon journey. So bourbon
They forget that initial big burn that just happens, and they don't really remember that everyone else might not enjoy that right off the bat.
Exactly. I'm not opposed to helping people get in, maybe ship them, or deliver them some a nice medium rye bourbon, like a Woodford Reserve with ale 8. Let's get some
Yeah.
ginger ale, some good strong ginger ale in that, which is a beautiful cocktail, just two
Uh,
ingredients, and it's
I was gonna
very
say, and
quick.
that's perfectly Kentucky.
It's perfect Kentucky.
And then for those that may want to, they're not really ready to drink bourbon straight, or even with maybe just the one little mix of a drink. What are some holiday cocktails and some meal pairings? Because Aften, talking beforehand, you said you might have a few ideas for people to maybe spice up some things and do some cocktails and show off maybe some skills.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that Tim has fully covered the bourbon and holiday food pairing piece, because when it comes to me and giving away gifts for Christmas, everybody gets a bottle of bourbon. That's just what you get. So, no surprises to all my friends and family. You are all getting bourbon. So, I will make sure everybody listens and understands what they can drink it with and enjoy it with. But my personal motto when it comes to bourbon is there really is no wrong way to enjoy it. So, like Tim said, if you want to mix it with ale 8, ginger ale, that's wonderful. If you're drinking it with any kind of mixer, any kind of cocktail, with any kind of food, as long as you're liking it, I'm happy. The industry is happy. But that's definitely where cocktails come in, is it just makes these really strong spirits more approachable. And of course, not just bourbon. We have tequila, we have gin, we have rum. We have vodka. So I love to get geeky about cocktails, and I really appreciate you bringing up this part when it comes to our holiday meals, Jonathan, because it tends to be all about food this time of year. And trust me, I'm all about being all about food. I eat at least 3 times a day, so totally into it. Definitely a tad more over the holidays. But I'm a very firm believer that the right drink enhances and completes your food. So can I get a little geeky about the cocktails and kind of my approach to doing that with
Absolutely.
what we're eating? Great.
Absolutely.
So we need to know, what are we dealing with if we want to pair our drinks, whether it's bourbon or a cocktail, properly. I would categorize our traditional American holiday cooking into probably 3 groups. First, we have our herbs. We see lots of rosemary, thyme, sage. Those get used over and over again. A second group would be our spices. There's lots of cinnamon, clove, ginger, nutmeg, allspice. In a nutshell, that's our pumpkin spice, right? That we all can't help but love because we're inundated with it from September 1st till the end of the year. And then the third group I would just lump into as our meat and potatoes category, or meatless and potatoes. I know there's lots of vegetarian cooking out there, but that includes, of course, beef, poultry, pork, but also squashes, root vegetables for this time of year, leeks, greens, chestnuts, walnuts, pecans, apple, cranberry, pumpkin. Those are kind of the central ingredients that we see in a lot of our foods. So now we know what we're working with. So there's 3 approaches that I take to pairing cocktails with our ingredients, with our flavors. And so the first would be to use the flavors directly in a cocktail. The second would be to balance the flavors with your cocktail. And then the third would be to create a complement or some kind of a backdrop that allows the flavors in your food to really pop. So I think the simplest one is just using our ingredients and our flavors directly in our cocktail to go with what we're enjoying with our food. So I mean, what comes to mind immediately is that infamous pumpkin spice, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, allspice, all the good things. And those do go very well with an array of bourbons, especially those higher ryes that Tim was talking about. So for me, what I will be doing to use this in a cocktail over the season will be making a pumpkin pie spice syrup. So it's just, simple syrup. It's so easy. I know the listeners have at least a little bit of experience in drink making. So we've got 1 part sugar to 1 part water. And then I'll be steeping mine with either mulling spices or a little bit of pumpkin spice that comes mixed together. Or you can kind of play with the amounts of cinnamon versus the amount of clove versus the amounts of allspice that you want to put in there. And you can even use a pumpkin puree, get that fruit, that fruit element into your syrup. And that, that's a staple ingredient for not just cocktails, but, any drink. If you want to put a little sweetener in your coffee that worked for in the morning or with your holiday desserts, that's going to be delicious in there. You could do, if we're sticking with bourbon as our spirit, you could do just an old fashioned where instead of a regular syrup, you now have a pumpkin pie syrup and use black walnut bitters for your dashes and a little cinnamon stick garnish. It's a really simple drink, but it's a direct use of our holiday flavors. So that's kind of the easiest way to go about it. The second approach is balancing the flavors, and this is where I find it to be a little more fun because what we're doing with balance is, let's think about what are the 5 tastes that we as humans can detect. We've got sweet, we've got sour, we've got bitter, salty, and umami. Yes. So when we as people, the more of those 5 that we can touch on with a single bite or a single meal, the more we like it. Tim actually gave me the reference a while back of Doritos chips. I mean, how addictive are those? Yes. Yeah. And if you think about it, they have every 5 of those elements in there. They're umami, they're bitter, they're salty, they're sour, there's tons of sugar in them. They're really good. We cannot help but love them. So kind of going for that, 5 taste goal in balancing a cocktail with food is the approach that I really like to take. So let's look at our herb category that I mentioned: thyme, sage, rosemary. Those are very umami flavors, probably salty. They've been salted and roasted with meats and oils, things like that. So for adding balance, we want to find some sweetness, some sour, and something bitter in our cocktails to complete that circle. So sticking with seasonal flavors and seasonal ingredients, I would definitely go for cranberry. Cranberry's got a nice tart, puckery flavor that kind of gives us that bitter element. Throw in some orange. Orange really brightens drinks very well. And of course, there's a natural sweetness to it. So with something, cranberry, orange, and fruity, I would absolutely go for a margarita. Number 1, I love them. They're easy to use. And number 2, I'm going to be honoring my mother in my cocktails this year. She was really supposed to be visiting, but we're going to play it safe. Nobody's going to be meeting long distance that requires flying an airplane. So I will just be honoring her in spirit, literally, through a margarita cocktail. That is her favorite. So,
well, and that's my wife's favorite too. So I totally understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have one. Do a cranberry orange margarita and, throw a little lime in there. Of course, it's not really a margarita without some lime. So you get a bit more of that sour element. And you've covered, think of pairing something like that with roasted turkey or with stuffing. I mean, that's why that cranberry sauce goes so well with that stuff. It's got a lot of sweetness and tartness combined that pairs really well with our traditional food. So kind of replicating in that drink is going to do really well. And I will say, just for a little extra fun, you fellas talked about some more refined holiday dining experiences in your background in your growing up years. Mine were a little more, I don't know, retro, I guess you could say. One of our holiday staples, I have to admit, was Jello salad. Have you guys ever eaten Jello salad?
I've heard of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's an experience. So I was raised a Kentucky lady, but I was born in North Dakota. And Jello salad, I'm sure, is still a holiday staple up in that part of the country. So we always had Jello salad and that old sweet potato dish, with the marshmallows baked on top.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of cooking I was dealing with. So I think just for fun, in honoring my mother and her sort of retro style cooking, I'm going to be doing cranberry orange Margarita Jello shots. It can totally be done.
Ooh,
Yeah,
okay, I like it.
just add gelatin. So Jello shots are getting classy these days, and they're fun, and it's a different way to do a drink, and it's a little bit safer. I think if it were not 2020, I would be talking more about batching drinks and punches and things that everybody would be sharing as a community bowl. We're not doing that. There's a pandemic this year, in case anybody happened to forget. So keeping individual servings is going to be a little bit safer. So I thought it would be a little playful to do a gelatin kind of cocktail and something of those components where it's that sour formula. You have your spirit, you've got your sweet and some juice is really easy to turn into Jello. So if anybody's feeling playful with their cocktails, that's going to be my kitchen playtime for sure. And then that third component I mentioned that third approach was kind of complementing or backdropping your flavors. So I would really go for pear, and pear is a really nice seasonal fruit that's very soft. It has a light sweetness. It's a good complement to our meats, our beef, poultry, and pork. It goes well with cinnamon. It's a really nice pairing with cheeses. Walnut does well with it. And then I'd spice it up with ginger. Again, ginger is a nice, light, sweeter spice. It's not going to overpower your drink or your food too much. So any kind of pear ginger concoction is going to do really well with any course, appetizer, dessert, or anything in between. And it's also very versatile with your spirits. So you could do, a pear sour where you've got citrus vodka, ginger syrup, some pear juice, a lemon juice. You could turn it into a fizz by using gin instead. Keep your pear syrup, throw in gin, keep some lemon for that brightness, and then top it with sparkling wine. If you wanted to do bourbon, I would just replace the gin with bourbon and replace your sparkling wine with ginger ale. So these are softer, lighter, seasonal ingredients that are going to help all the other flavors pop. So there's a lot of directions you can go with your cocktails. I don't think you can go wrong as long as you're enjoying it and kind of sticking to those principles of either matching our flavors, balancing them, and trying to hit those 5 tastes that we can sense as much as possible, or creating a backdrop that will really let everything else sort of highlight.
And for Afton, Tim, both of you, I love, especially around Christmas, in between Christmas and New Year's, I love to eat all the holiday cookies. I have a slight problem. I'm admitting it. I probably go too many times to the dessert bar. What are some good things that might pair with that? Later in the day, when you want to have a couple cookies, or depending on where you live, some Buckeyes or things like that. What might pair well with those?
Oh, I can definitely hop in here. So last winter, I had a many months long ongoing home experiment of which bourbon goes best in hot chocolate. Because what is a cookie in the wintertime without hot chocolate? It's only a cookie, but it becomes amazing when we add it with some boozy cocoa. Yes. So my final assessment was Old Forester 86 was the perfect pairing for any kind of hot chocolate. It's lighter, it's softer, it's got these really pleasant kind of banana notes in the flavor, which are just delicious with a creamy chocolate hot beverage. So that's going to be my first submission on that one.
I like that. Tim, do you have anything? If I just want to, just a straight up bourbon, no cocktail, with a nice cookie and some desserts.
Yeah, I'm going to make one very specific recommendation, which I normally don't do, but for cookies, I'm a huge fan of the Boone County Small Batch. It's a higher rye, but doesn't present that way. And to me, it is like liquid cookie. It is this combination of sugar cookie with a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of nutmeg and almost a hint of chocolate underneath. And it just wants to almost have a buttery character. And so for snickerdoodles or chocolate chip cookies or anything like that, it is just my personal, affection right at the moment as the Boone County small batch.
I love it. I love it. Aften, Tim, this was great. Gives me a lot of ideas. We'll see if I can pull any of them off. But it does sound like everything. One of the biggest things that everyone has said: keep it simple, keep it smart, and just kind of go with stuff that you like, and remember your journey with bourbons or different spirits and what you've enjoyed along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Aften, Tim, thank you all so much for coming on here and sharing some holiday cocktails, some bourbon, meal pairings, what goes well with each, and I look forward to seeing folks try these at home.
Thank you so much. Great topic. Appreciate it.
I hope they let us know how it turns out.
Thank you again to Tim Knittel and Aften Locken of Distilled Living for giving us some insights on some food pairings with bourbon, some cocktails that you can also make so you can have some good times if you're throwing a little get-together for friends and family, social distance, of course, during these times. And before we get to Jarrett, the Things We Love holiday giveaway, we told you about Pies and Pints, told you about the gift packs, but guess what? I've got a nice bottle, that's right, a 750 milliliter, a fifth of Chattanooga Whiskey Cask 111. I think it might be my favorite, just easy grab off the shelf bottle of whiskey right now, and 2 whiskey glasses to give away as part of our Things We Love holiday giveaway. Check that out, our Instagram page tomorrow at Hops Spirits. You can also find some more information on Facebook and Twitter, also at Hops Spirits, all one word. But that's right, the Things We Love holiday giveaway gets underway tomorrow. Find it on our social media. And now let's get back to the fun as we talk to Jarrett Dieterle. Did I say that right, Jarrett?
Yeah, you did. There you go. Dieterle. Yep.
Dieterle. I see. I knew I was going to mess that up. Jarrett researches and writes on regulatory affairs, alcohol policy, many other things for our street. Also does some few other fun things. And he even wrote a book. So Jarrett, thanks for coming on here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and chat booze.
I was gonna say, looking at what you do for a living, you love booze just like the rest of us, but I just feel like you're way smarter than all of us.
It's funny because I feel the opposite. I feel way dumber because I came into this from the policy side. And so then I've spent the last, decade trying to, I always liked spirits and beer and other, alcoholic beverages, but I've been spending the last decade, I feel like, trying to catch up more on that side of it. And so I, will meet people in the distilling or brewing community who, can go so deep on beer, and I've gotten, better at that now, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm the dumb one in the room.
Well, I would disagree with that. But for those that may not understand exactly what you do when you talk about that policy stuff, what is it that you do for our street? Because I know you're the editor of the Drinks Reform,
right,
and do some other work for them too, right?
Yeah. The Our Street Institute is just a policy research, nonpartisan policy research organization. So it basically means that me and the people that work there think and research and write for a living about public policy topics and how to ideally improve public policy to make people's lives better day to day. So we do all kinds of different topics. I do a lot of stuff in the regulatory space. Things outside the alcohol markets, but also, of course, the alcohol markets, which has been taking up most of my time recently, because of the book coming out, but also because of the COVID shock. It's upended so much of the alcohol policy landscape overnight that it's been really busy. So, but I do a bunch of different kinds of regulatory stuff. And it's, as I said, I got into kind of that space first. And then the more I kind of peeled back the layers of the onion when it came to alcohol markets, I realized, if there's ever an example of an industry that is incredibly outdated with rules that are just archaic and very burdensome and maybe don't make a lot of sense in our modern marketplace, it's alcohol. So there's just so much fodder there to dive into. So that's why I got particularly interested in the alcohol space.
I mean, what do you mean? I mean, I feel like it's just going so smoothly in the alcohol world. I mean, come on, right?
Right. Yeah. There's this perfect marketplace. I wish it was that easy. I might be out of a job, but it would be a better world. So.
Yeah, I think where I'm based out of in Kentucky is like the perfect example of this. We're a state that touts its bourbon, and yet there are still many counties that you can't even buy bourbon in.
Right.
So, I totally understand that. And Did your what made you decide to write the book? And the book, for those that don't know, is called "Give Me Liberty and Give Me a Drink: 65 Cocktails to Protest America's Most Outlandish Alcohol Laws." What made you decide to do something like this? Because I don't feel like this is just something you just easily dive right into.
Yeah, so it started, again as a policy person, getting more and more interested in the drinks landscape, and that inevitably led. One of the things I really try to do is to talk to people in the industry and interview them, and write either journalistic features or use them in some of the policy pieces that I'm writing. Just because I feel like it's one thing to sit kind of in this theoretical ivory tower, right, where you're just kind of pronouncing to the masses like ideas on how to improve things, but the people that really live it are the key, because they know what's impacting their day-to-day life most. So it really started for me over a period of years interviewing and getting to know a lot of people in the drinks space all across the country. And two things really stuck out to me. One is that I started hearing a lot of the same issues from them. And two, I noticed that it wasn't a one state problem. It was a 50 state thing. And that's because of the way that the cookie crumbled with our legal system surrounding alcohol after prohibition. So much of the power was devolved to the state and local level, even county level sometimes, that all across the country, distillers and brewers and bartenders and liquor store owners were dealing with just a host of silly laws that oftentimes had a lot of commonalities, sometimes were unique to a state, but everywhere there was this theme of outdated protectionist laws that were hurting people from doing what they wanted to do for their living and growing their businesses in a healthy, productive way. And so I started thinking, it'd be neat to do some kind of a systematic overview of what's going on out there in America in the drinks landscape, as far as laws and regulations that are affecting people. But I also wanted to make it approachable. I could sit here all day and write like really complicated white paper like tome that no one would read. So I wanted to also make it fun and accessible. And given that it is alcohol, which is an inherently fun topic, I thought what better way maybe than to kind of feature some of the most ridiculous laws from each state, which I did in my book, and then pair them with a cocktail recipe kind of inspired by the law, or in some way maybe connected to it, or featuring maybe a producer in that particular state. So that's what led me down the path to do the book. And again, I wanted to make it fun and readable, entertaining, and hopefully a little bit witty for people, and kind of part trivia, part bizarre history, part cocktail book. And so that's what led me to do it. And that's how the book ended up the way that it ended up.
I was gonna say it's a fun read because you kind of hit the nail on the head for me. It's definitely part trivia, because now I sound smarter when I'm talking to my friends and I can drop some cool knowledge. But also you do get some really cool cocktails that are inspired by some of those laws that don't make any sense, and we'll touch on those here in a little bit. But you also highlight some amazing people that have done some stuff in the spirits world. What was it like writing about those things, because I feel like that's a real interesting approach to bring all that together.
Yeah. Well, it's actually an idea that I think it was actually my editor kind of had talked to me, and my editor kind of came up with it when we were talking, is kind of interspersing in the book features of people that actually were dealing again with some of these laws in their everyday life. So, a distiller from Virginia, a bar owner from Ohio I interviewed, all different people that were actually, again, dealing with either one or several kinds of crazy laws that were really limiting their ability to grow. And I feel like, telling stories is what ultimately changes hearts and minds, and hearing from and featuring the people that are working so hard, because starting a craft alcohol facility, or running a restaurant or bar, is everyone that is listening to your podcast well knows, is really, really, really tough work. It's among the toughest work that I think you can go into as far as industries and lines of work. And so I just thought it was important to talk about it and bring it to life a little bit. Again, make it less abstract. It's fun to have kind of the trivia pieces, but it's also like here's how that law actually, what it's doing in someone's life and all the negative costs of that. So that's why another thing that I did, again, to create a little levity, was also doing some kind of historical profiles of famous bootleggers or moonshiners throughout American history. It was important to me to kind of make people realize that government and alcohol in America has always had a complicated kind of frenemy relationship. If they're on a Facebook relationship, it would be, it's complicated because we from the Whiskey Rebellion onward, even before that, really, we've always had this tension between the government overstepping its hand and then people in the alcohol marketplace either finding a way around that or somehow pushing back on it. And that dynamic's still very much at play. A different set of laws today, often, but that dynamic's still very much at play. So I wanted to also not just have a 50-state survey of what's going on, but also a kind of a vertical survey throughout history from the founding of our country onwards.
And with a book like this, I feel like there's a lot of research that has to go into it to make it like you did. It's got a lot of great trivia, a lot of great stories, some really cool cocktails. How much time and effort went into researching all of this? Because, like I said, you run a wide gamut on it.
Yeah, that's another question that I've often gotten about the book, and it's interesting. It's hard to calculate it exactly, but it was over a period of years, really, that research was done that ultimately went into the book. I mean, since I've been doing this, every time I would run across some just kind of outlandish, silly law somewhere, I would just kind of keep track of it. And for a while, it started as a Word document, and then eventually, as it grew, it got more organized into a spreadsheet. And just over time, I had some colleagues that would send me stuff or help research stuff on it over time, and it just grew, and then kind of that led to kind of the idea of, well, we should do one for each state. And the only kind of little bit tricky part at the end was making sure that I had a good representation from each state. One of the things that happens a lot, as I alluded to earlier in the alcohol marketplace, is there'll be some states that have like a really unique, like one-off law, like Indiana's warm beer law that says that gas stations and convenience stores can only sell beer if it's room temperature. That's very unique to Indiana. There's not a ton of states that have exact parallels to that. Sometimes there'll be some similar ones, but most of the time, in many of the cases, some of the laws I featured, it would, 10 or 15 states would have some version of that law. So it was figuring out, do we feature South Dakota for this one, or do we do North Carolina? And just kind of fitting the pieces of the puzzle in, because again, I wanted to show that there were these versions of silly laws across all 50 states. So that was a little stressful at the end. It was almost like a jigsaw puzzle, making sure all the pieces could fit in. And that's why I ended up actually featuring 65 laws total, just because I was like, all right, I have some leftovers, some duplicative ones, and I want to make sure that I get all the craziness into one volume.
Well, and it's amazing too to me that, as I've done this and just done a little more research myself, how some of these laws really thwart business. Like I think of my home state where I grew up in West Virginia, and they had a law that said, what, beer couldn't be more than like 4 or 6% alcohol. You're not going to get a whole lot of brewers to start up there.
Yep.
And things like that. And I guess I was younger at the time, so I didn't really understand. But once they lifted that cap, that's when Yingling and so many others came into the state, and then you actually had your own. It's just amazing how, and that was in the 2000s. That wasn't even that long ago, really.
Yeah, weak beer laws or some people have called them 3.2 laws. Usually goes back to how they originated. I think now there's only one true 3.2 law, that beer can't be over 3.2 percent alcohol content in Minnesota, but there's still a bunch of states that have gotten rid of 3.2, but now they've raised it to like 4 or 5. It's still very low, but those so-called weak beer laws are a great example of they're almost kind of a microcosm of the alcohol legal landscape, because they have their roots back about a century to the end of Prohibition, when FDR was trying to kind of start loosening some of the grip around prohibition. And what they did is pass a federal law that gave states the ability to allow the sale and manufacture of 3.2% beer. The idea being that it still worked under the 18th Amendment because it could be defined as not intoxicating. The 18th Amendment banned intoxicating alcohol. And so that's kind of where it started. These states passed that. At the time, it was kind of like a reform, right? A liberalization of the laws. But then momentum, just status quo kind of stasis, just that they didn't revisit it for almost a century. And so then fast forward to modern times, as you alluded to, into the 2000s, and a handful of states have these 3.2 laws still in the books, and then at that point they're way restrictive on the restrictive side of things, because they're not allowing, pretty much any, imperial IPA in existence is going to be over that threshold, right? So it was locking all these craft beers out of the beer market. So it's such a good example of how to understand alcohol history or alcohol policy, you have to understand alcohol history, and then to show how an outdated law over time can come to do something totally different than what it was intended to do, and really hurt entrepreneurs in the drinks world.
And then to kind of segue, there are some that I just consider, I'm like, I have no idea why that was a law. A couple of the ones that I really enjoyed in this book were the $1 margaritas are illegal in New Mexico.
Yes.
Heaven forbid we have a fun happy hour in Massachusetts. But I think my favorite one, and just the Zion Curtain in Utah, I just don't understand that. Like that just makes no sense to me.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar, the Zion Curtain is just a rule that basically requires some kind of a wall or partition or buffer zone between the actual bar tender making the drinks in a Utah bar and the customer base. It originally required an actual physical wall, floor to ceiling, totally blocked the view of it. The idea being that, it's okay to get your cocktail, I guess, but you can't watch it being made. Never fully understood that distinction. Another one that's
I guess
very
heaven forbid you go home and do it. Right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, they don't want anyone to learn anything when they're at the bar. Yeah. Another fun one. I know you're based in Kentucky, so another fun one is you alluded to the dry counties in Kentucky. I thought it was funny. Dry counties are in about a dozen states now still, but a lot of states have now had this kind of intermediate category, which they called moist, and Kentucky's got several of those, and that can mean all different kinds of things. My favorite one I found from Kentucky was they have I think at least one or two counties that are dry but considered moist, because the only place in the county that can actually sell alcohol is a USGA approved golf course, which I thought was so hilarious in so many ways, because it's so illustrative of the alcohol policy space, because it shows, first of all, how much lobbying clout can matter. It's very obvious what happened there. The owners of the golf course and country clubs, went and lobbied for this carve out to it. B, it shows, again, very antiquated law. And then C, you couldn't come up with a more, unintendedly elitist law, I think, if you tried, where it's just okay, the people that are going to the country club, which are presumably wealthier, country club set, can drink booze all day long, but everyone else in the county, forget about it. And so I felt like it was such a wonderful example of some of the forces that you see across the alcohol legal landscape.
Yeah, and I can't top that craziness, but I can kind of point to that where I previously worked at the county seat in the city was kind of the wet, what you would call wet these days. You could buy liquor, and it's always been that way. And that was one of the last places in Kentucky, going down I-75, that you could get beer or liquor. Yeah. And I was always told that those liquor store owners were the biggest proponents of dry counties south of them for the longest time, because it was good for their business.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and you see that in so many places. You'll see certain licensees, or based on geographical location, certain retailers will have something that is some way in which the structure is benefiting them and creating essentially a windfall for them, or some kind of almost like government sanctions form of monopoly, really. And they've existed and continue to exist because of that, and that creates a lot of reliance interests, right? I mean, they rely on that. That's their piece of the pie that has been kind of carved into the legal code and left that way for decades and decades and decades. And so they're often the proponents that are most protective of that not changing over time. And so you see that again in so many of these situations where the law is very outdated. It might have originally been put in for outdated prohibition era concerns about alcohol, but now really the defense of it is shifted to more people that have and businesses that have some kind of a reliance interest on it, that want to keep it in place for economic reasons for themselves. And so it's just really interesting how it shifts over time and kind of what the forces are that are protecting the status quo in the alcohol space.
And then my last question for you is, what's the one law that always kind of stands out in your mind that is just so weird that or unproductive that you just have to talk about it?
Yeah, this is funny. It's tough because you could answer it a lot of different ways. I think that I always like to answer it in two parts by saying that that as far as kind of just goofy law that is so obviously protectionist. I referenced it earlier in that Indiana, I just find it so amazing that they allow gas stations, convenience stores to sell beer, but they literally legally prohibit them from plopping them in a refrigerator or in an ice chest. They can serve wine chilled, but they cannot serve beer chilled. Why does it exist? It exists because a liquor store licensee, different type of licensee, works very hard to protect their status as the only retail licensee in Indiana that can sell cold beer. So again, they don't want the gas stations to be able to sell cold beer too. It's such an anti-consumer, inconvenient law. It's funny, the convenience stores and gas stations have lobbied over the years to get it changed. They finally got the right to get cold wine, as I referenced. One convenience store owner actually installed a couple booths and started selling burritos at his gas station, and then got a restaurant license, which allowed him to sell cold beer. But then the state government officials, being lobbied by the liquor stores, freaked out about that and closed that loophole too. So it's been this kind of game of cat and mouse that you just look, you step back and like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Why are we creating all these silly legislative games that are going on? Why not just modernize this like every other state has done for the most part, and allow refrigerated beer to be sold by the licensees that can sell it. The other one that I often feature, it's not really a law, but it is a system that's still in place in over a dozen states, is what are known as controlled states. That just a jargony term for the government is actually running the retail operations of the distilled spirits in those states. So my state of residence in Virginia is a control state. I have to go to a government operated, employed, staffed, and maintained store, ABC store it's called, to get distilled spirits. They're always kind of these drab, like 1950s era, like feeling stores, always have limited selection, usually have higher prices than private retailers in states where you can sell distilled spirits. And that just creates a whole host of problems. For example, even distilleries, micro distilleries, craft distilleries in Virginia, in order to sell their own spirits on site, they technically have to become an ABC agent store. And the ABC still takes a huge markup out of their sales, even though the ABC system is doing nothing to sell those bottles. It also means that if you're a distillery and you try to pitch your products to the ABC store, if they don't want to carry those products, you're locked out of the entire state marketplace in your own backyard. If it's a private retailer, you can just go to the other retailer down the street and repitch your products to him in hopes he carries it. But if the ABC system doesn't take your bourbon that you want to be sold in their stores, then you're effectively locked out of your whole backyard. So it's just that all-encompassing power that can really make or break small craft producers, I find to be really quite terrifying, frankly, and just so out of touch in our modern 21st century marketplace, and kind of having everything at your fingertips as a consumer. So I always feature those two, one because one's just really goofy, and the other one because it just shows the stakes kind of at play.
I'll say I live close enough to the Virginia border that I visited an ABC store once or twice, and they're just a couple rows of things, and it's not very very exciting in there. And then now I come into Kentucky, and we have pretty much huge mega liquor stores. So
well, and it's amazing. Like when I go into like a liquor stores in Kentucky, when I visited in other states, like people, by and large, there's some exceptions, but you don't have to go to that store. But by and large, people in those stores know what they're talking about. If you ask them for, say, a recommendation for a good triple sec that maybe isn't quite the price point of like a Cointreau, but still going to make you a really nice margarita, they'll have thoughts about it, and they'll, bring you over and be like, oh, these are the different price points. This one's a pretty good comp for that. But if you try to get anything out of, the people that staff the ABC stores in Virginia, they don't know anything about the spirits and take no interest in it. And it's kind of like the perverse dynamics and incentives that those employees have. So it's just overall like a really depressing experience as a Virginia consumer compared to like places like Kentucky, where if you walk into a whiskey bar or a store that sells whiskey, like, you could talk for an hour with the person about different kinds of whiskey.
Jared, I really appreciate you hopping on here to talk about your book, which is called Give Me Liberty and Give Me a Drink. It's out now. It's a fun read. I recommend, if you're looking for a great Christmas gift, this is perfect for the bourbon beer lover in your life, or if you're just looking for a fun read, it's a great one.
I appreciate it much. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, Jonathan. Yeah, it's unlike alcohol. You can most alcohol you can ship it across state lines too. So, but I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me on. And it's always fun to talk about this stuff.
It was a lot of fun talking with Jarrett, and I hope we get him back on in the future. His book is a great read. So much interesting facts in there that you'll be a little bit of a trivia buff when it comes to the alcohol industry. Like I said, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Hop Spirits, all one word, for our Things We Love holiday giveaway, how you can win all those great prizes. And don't forget to follow our friends on Instagram, One Sip Beer Review. Find them at One Sip Beer Review for near daily beer reviews. They do some other fun videos, cool giveaways, a lot of fun. Check them out at One Sip Beer Review on Instagram. Until next time, cheers, everyone.